Story 1. The Amazon Airplane. When I boarded the small charter plane in Manaus, I wasn't thinking about the danger. I'd been planning this trip for months, excited to see the Amazon rainforest up close. The plane was small, just a single-engine Cessna, carrying 5 passengers. The pilot, a couple on their honeymoon, a quiet man in his 40s, and me. I was traveling alone, hoping to escape the noise of my life back home. The takeoff was smooth, the view from above breathtaking. The vast, endless green of the rainforest stretched out below us like a living ocean. About 40 minutes into the flight, the weather shifted. Dark clouds rolled in, and the plane began to rattle. The pilot reassured us it was just turbulence, but I noticed his tone was tense. Then, the engine sputtered. At first, it was subtle, just a hiccup in the hum. But when it happened again, the pilot's calm facade cracked. He began flipping switches, his voice urgent over the radio, speaking in rapid Portuguese. I didn't need to understand the language to know we were in trouble. The engine cut out completely, and the plane lurched forward, losing altitude fast. "Brace yourselves," the pilot shouted. I grabbed the seat in front of me, my heart pounding, as the trees rushed toward us. The impact was like nothing I'd ever felt. A deafening crash, the sound of metal tearing, and the jolt of my body being thrown against the seatbelt. When I opened my eyes, everything was quiet except for the faint hiss of steam escaping from the wreckage. I was alive, though my head throbbed, and my arms were covered in cuts from shattered glass. The couple behind me was stirring, groaning in pain. The man in his 40s, his name was Carlos, I later learned, was unconscious, but breathing. The pilot was pinned under the controls, blood trickling from a gash on his forehead. I scrambled out of my seat, the ground uneven beneath my feet, as I climbed out of the broken plane. The smell of gasoline filled the air, and I shouted for everyone to get out before something ignited. Once we were all out, and a safe distance from the wreckage, the reality of our situation hit. We were in the middle of the Amazon rainforest, miles from civilization, with no way to contact anyone. The radio was destroyed, and our phones had no signal. The pilot, his leg clearly broken, tried to stay calm as he assessed our situation. "We need to find water and shelter," he said. "Help will come, but it might take days." The first night was brutal. We stayed close to the plane, using what supplies we could salvage: a first aid kit, a few bottles of water, and some snacks. The couple, Emily and Mark, clung to each other, whispering reassurances neither of them believed. Carlos, who regained consciousness, was stoic, but visibly shaken. The pilot kept giving us instructions, his voice steady, despite the pain. By the second day, we knew we couldn't stay by the plane. The heat was unbearable, and the flies were relentless. The pilot directed us to follow a small stream we'd found nearby. "Rivers lead to people," he said. We fashioned a makeshift stretcher for him, using pieces of the plane and vines, and began our trek. The jungle was like a living thing, both beautiful and terrifying. Every step was a challenge, the ground slick with mud, the air thick with humidity. We were constantly swatting at insects and listening for the sounds of predators we couldn't see. Every rustle in the trees made my heart race. On the third day, our water ran out. The stream wasn't safe to drink from without boiling, and none of us had the means to make a fire. The pilot's condition was worsening, his fever rising. It was Carlos who spotted the first sign of hope: a faint trail cutting through the jungle. It was narrow and overgrown, but it was a trail nonetheless. We followed it, each step filled with both dread and anticipation. By dusk, we stumbled upon a small village, a cluster of thatched huts nestled beside the river. The people who lived there approached cautiously, their expressions a mix of concern and curiosity. One of the older men, who spoke broken Portuguese, listened as the pilot explained our situation. The villagers were incredibly kind. They gave us clean water, food, and a place to rest. They even sent someone in a dugout canoe to alert authorities in a larger town, downriver. We stayed there for 2 days, regaining our strength and caring for the pilot as best we could. When the rescue team arrived, I was overwhelmed with relief. They airlifted the pilot to a hospital and took the rest of us to the nearest city. As I sat in the helicopter, watching the vast green canopy stretch out below, I couldn't help but think about how close we'd come to disappearing forever in that jungle. Even now, years later, I think about those days in the Amazon, the terror, the beauty, the strength I didn't know I had. Survival wasn't just about staying alive. It was about hope and the kindness of strangers. I'll never forget the people who helped us when we were at our weakest, and I'll always carry a piece of that jungle with me, both its darkness and its light. Story 2. Alone at Sea. I've always loved the ocean. Growing up on the Florida coast, I spent more time on the water than on land. My family owned a small fishing boat, and every weekend my dad and I would head out to sea to catch whatever was biting. By the time I was 25, I'd bought my own boat, a modest 22-foot center console that I used for everything from fishing trips to casual sunset cruises. On a cool November morning, I decided to take the boat out for a solo fishing trip. The forecast predicted clear skies and calm seas, so I loaded up my gear, packed some snacks, and launched from the marina just after sunrise. The water was like glass, the kind of perfect conditions every boater dreams about. I headed about 15 miles offshore, far enough to get away from the weekend crowds, but close enough to make it back before dark. For hours, everything was perfect. The fish were biting, and I even reeled in a decent-sized grouper. I was so focused on fishing that I didn't notice the clouds starting to roll in. By mid-afternoon, the wind picked up and the waves grew choppier. I checked my GPS and decided it was time to head back, but as I turned the key in the ignition, the engine sputtered and died. My heart sank. I tried again. Nothing. I had a basic understanding of boat engines, but whatever the issue was, it was beyond me. I wasn't too worried at first. I had my radio and a cell phone, so I figured I could call for help. But when I reached for my phone, I realized I'd left it in my truck back at the marina. That left the radio. But no matter how many channels I tried, all I got was static. The clouds thickened, and the wind howled as the first drops of rain began to fall. My small boat rocked violently with each wave, and I knew I was in trouble. With no way to communicate and no engine, I was at the mercy of the sea. As night fell, the rain turned into a downpour. I used my anchor to try and keep the boat from drifting too far, but I knew I was at the mercy of the currents. The waves crashed against the sides of the boat, spraying me with salt water and soaking everything I had on board. I huddled under the console for some protection, shivering as the temperature dropped. By the second day, I was exhausted, hungry, and starting to panic. The storm had passed, leaving behind clear skies, but I was completely alone in the vast expanse of water. The only sound was the gentle lapping of waves against the hull. I rationed my small stash of snacks and sipped sparingly from the half-full water bottle I'd brought, knowing it wouldn't last long. The sun was brutal, and by midday, I could feel my skin burning. I rigged a makeshift shade using a fishing pole and an old towel, but it offered little relief. The loneliness was the worst part. I had no idea how far I'd drifted, or if anyone was even looking for me. On the third day, I spotted something on the horizon, a distant ship. My heart raced as I grabbed the emergency flare from the boat's kit. My hands shook as I fired it into the sky, the bright red streak disappearing into the clouds. I watched, desperate, as the ship continued on its course. It was too far away. By the fourth day, I was delirious. The combination of dehydration, hunger, and heat was taking its toll. I started hallucinating, hearing voices and seeing shadows on the water. My body felt heavy, and I struggled to keep my eyes open. Part of me wanted to give up, but the thought of my family kept me going. Late that afternoon, I saw something I thought was another hallucination. A helicopter. I blinked, unsure if it was real, but then I heard the faint thrum of its rotors. I grabbed the last flare and fired it, watching as the helicopter turned in my direction. Tears streamed down my face as it hovered overhead, and I waved my arms frantically. The rescue team winched me up, their voices calm and reassuring as they strapped me into a harness. I broke down sobbing as they pulled me into the helicopter, relief washing over me. They told me a passing cargo ship had spotted the flare on the third day and reported it to the Coast Guard, who had been searching for me ever since. When we landed back on shore, I collapsed into my family's arms, overwhelmed with gratitude. I'd survived 4 days alone at sea, but the experience left me with a newfound respect for the ocean. I still go out on my boat, but now I triple-check everything, especially my phone and radio. The sea is beautiful, but it's also unforgiving, and I'll never take it lightly again. Story 3. The Crumbling Canyon. I'd always loved hiking, especially in remote, untamed areas where it felt like I was the only person on Earth. Living in Arizona, I had plenty of opportunities to explore canyons, mesas, and deserts. One weekend in early October, I decided to venture out to a lesser-known trail in the Grand Staircase Escalante region of Utah. The area was known for its rugged beauty and deep, winding canyons, and I'd read online that the trail was challenging, but worth the effort. I packed the essentials: water, snacks, a first aid kit, and my phone. The plan was to hike down into a canyon, follow the dry creek bed for a few miles, and then loop back up to my car by evening. The trail wasn't marked, but I had a downloaded map on my phone, so I wasn't too concerned. The first few hours were incredible. The towering red sandstone walls of the canyon were breathtaking, and the solitude was refreshing. I stopped often to take photos, feeling at peace in the stillness. But as I made my way deeper into the canyon, the trail became less defined. I found myself stepping over loose rocks and navigating around boulders, trying to stay on what I thought was the path. Around mid-afternoon, I reached a narrow section of the canyon where the walls closed in tightly. I climbed up a small ledge to get a better view of the terrain ahead, but as I stepped forward, the rock beneath my foot crumbled. Before I could react, I lost my balance and tumbled down the side of the canyon, landing hard on the rocky floor below. The pain was immediate and blinding. My right leg was twisted at an unnatural angle, and I knew instantly it was broken. Panic set in as I tried to move, but the searing pain forced me to stop. I reached for my phone, only to realize there was no signal deep in the canyon. I tried to stay calm, assessing my situation. I was alone, injured, and miles from civilization. My water bottle had burst in the fall, leaving me with only a few ounces in a backup flask. My food supply consisted of a couple of granola bars. The sun was starting to dip lower in the sky, and I knew the temperature would plummet once night fell. Using my backpack as a makeshift pillow, I settled in for the night, shivering as the desert cold seeped into my bones. Every sound, the rustling of leaves, The distant call of a bird felt amplified in the silence. Sleep came in fitful bursts, broken by the throbbing pain in my leg. The next morning, I tried to come up with a plan. Moving was out of the question, but I could use my whistle to signal for help. I blew it every hour, hoping someone might be close enough to hear. The hours dragged on, and the sun beat down mercilessly. I rationed my water and nibbled on a granola bar, but my energy was fading. By the third day, I was delirious. The pain in my leg was unbearable, and I was dangerously dehydrated. I kept blowing the whistle, but my hope was dwindling. I thought about my family and the irony of dying in a place I'd come to for peace and adventure. Just as I was starting to lose consciousness, I heard it, a faint voice in the distance. I opened my eyes, squinting against the harsh sunlight, and saw a group of hikers standing at the edge of the canyon. One of them waved and yelled, "We've got you! Hang on!" Relief flooded through me as they climbed down carefully, carrying a first aid kit and water. They'd heard my whistle from a nearby trail and decided to investigate. One of them, a nurse, checked my leg and stabilized it as best as she could, while another called for a rescue team on a satellite phone. It took several hours for the rescue crew to arrive, and by the time they carried me out of the canyon, I was barely coherent. At the hospital, doctors told me I was lucky to be alive. A few more hours without water, and I might not have made it. That experience changed me. I still love hiking, but now I carry a personal locator beacon, extra water, and more emergency supplies. Nature is beautiful, but it's also unforgiving, and I'll never underestimate it again. Thanks so much for listening to Nightmare Narratives. We hope you enjoyed these truly terrifying stories. If you did, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications so you'll know when we post new videos every Tuesday and Friday at 10 a.m. Central Time. If you have a scary story you'd like to hear read on the channel, email us at officialnightmarenarratives@gmail.com, and you might just hear your story in a future episode. Thanks again for listening, and stay spooky, friends. We'll catch you in the next one.